Wouldn't it just be amazing if you could be a super communicator? Kylie, do you feel like you're a super communicator?
It depends who I'm talking to.
With me, with the kids, with the family. Today on the Happy Families podcast, how to be a super communicator based on a book from New York Times bestselling author Charles Duhigg. Hello and welcome to the Happy Families podcast. Real parenting solutions every single day on Australia's most downloaded parenting podcast. I'm Justin. I'm here with Kylie. And today, I had a chat with Charles Duhigg. Charles Duhigg is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, like I said, New York Times bestselling author, who happens to be fascinated by how humans work, from our habits to the way we communicate. And when he's not writing bestsellers like The Power of Habit, which is a personal favorite of mine and has been sitting on my bookshelf, I've read it, by the way, for many years. And also Smarter, Faster, Better. He's at home with his two boys and his wife in Santa Cruz, California. So I chatted with him, Kylie. He blew me away with what he had to say. And we're going to play his full interview on Saturday for our special weekend episode of the Happy Families podcast. But you and I have got some stuff to talk about because he said some really, really great stuff that we should dissect today on the pod. First thing that struck me was a beautiful illustration about how we can be super communicators with our kids. Check this out.
If you think back to the conversations you had with your parents, or I think back to the conversations I had with my parents, there are very few conversations that stand out in my mind where my dad gave me a piece of advice and I was like, gosh darn it, he's right. I'm going to change everything.
Yeah.
Right? It might have happened. It probably did happen, but I have managed to forget all of them. Yeah. But the conversations I remember with my dad were the ones where either I told him how I was feeling or he asked me something and I said something in response that kind of surprised me. We tend to remember the conversations that are connection as opposed to just information exchange. And it's really hard to connect when like one person has all the answers and one person has all the questions. That's not a meeting of equals.
So last week on the podcast, I shared an experience I had with one of our daughters who was wanting to do something that she knew I was going to struggle to say yes to. And she came and she asked me for permission. And I was in the middle of something and I just acknowledged to her at that moment that I didn't feel good about it. And I could feel the emotions building up very, very quickly within her. She managed to kind of kibosh them a little bit, push them down. And she said, Mum, she said, I know you're busy right now, but she said, I really want to have an adult conversation about this. So can you make some time?
Isn't it great when your teenagers start saying, I know you're busy. I want to talk about something important. I want to be an adult about it. When would be a good time? I mean, what a beautiful sign of maturity and that your kids are getting older and growing up. So nice.
And this has been a bit of training on our part because when the kids have come to us with difficult questions or requests of us and their emotions get built up because we're not giving them the response they want, I have acknowledged them time and time again. If you want to be treated like an adult, if you want to be given this greater privilege, then this requires being able to sit in this hard place and have an adult-to-adult conversation. I love how Charles talks about the idea that our kids want to be treated like equals. They want to feel like they have as much stake in the conversation as you. If you're the only one talking, if you're the only one finding solutions, then our kids don't feel connection. They just feel like they're being berated, they're being nagged, they're being talked at. They're not able to connect.
Going back probably 10 years, maybe more, when our eldest, who's now in her mid-20s, was a young teenager, I remember walking up the hill towards our home one afternoon and I was doing my best to teach her, to help her to understand how life works, and I was expounding the mysteries of the universe to her. I mean, I was doing such a great job. I think she was struggling with some friends or she was struggling with something at school or whatever it was, and I was in full-blown lecture mode. Keep in mind, at the time, I was still a university lecturer, so that's what I got paid to do. I got paid to profess. It's like a university professor. And while I was professing all of this stuff, she looked at me. Let's say she was 12 years old, 11 years old, something like that. And she said, Dad, why are you always trying to teach me stuff? Then she added, I don't need you to be my psychologist. I need you to be my dad. And what she's really saying is, Dad, I want connection. This is this thing that we talk about all the time on the Happy Families podcast, in all of my books, in all of my presentations. Connection is feeling seen and heard and valued.
When we get on our high horse, we actually make them feel inferior.
Right. Here's the thing. If you go back to Charles' comment, I reckon if we were to sit down with any of our kids and say, hey, what are the conversations that you most remember that we've had? I'll guarantee Chanel won't remember walking up that hill and saying, Dad, why are you always trying to teach me stuff? She'll have forgotten it completely. Why? Because there was no connection. She wasn't feeling seen, heard, and valued. She had a father who was being a psychologist, being a professor, telling her all the stuff that she was, I guess, not quite measuring up with, all the stuff that she needed to know so that she could navigate life better. Just doesn't work.
One of the acronyms that you use from time to time is the word WAIT.
WAIT.
I love this.
WAIT stands for?
Why am I talking?
Right.
Why am I talking? When we're sitting down with our kids, we need to ask ourselves, why am I talking in this moment? Because the conversations our kids will remember are actually the ones where they're doing most of the talking.
Which means that if we're going to be a super communicator with our children, or even with our husband or wife or partner or spouse,
it's actually about turning...
It's about asking questions.
Yeah, turning it on its head. It's not about us talking.
Right.
It's actually about us asking questions, facilitating a discussion, and then listening.
After the break, we talk about the 3 types of conversations Charles Duhigg has identified as what everyone's looking for when they're trying to connect. Kylie, when I was speaking with Charles Duhigg, and we are playing the entire interview, gosh, it's a good interview. It's one of my favorite interviews ever. When I was talking to Charles, we talked about the 3 different types of conversations that people have.
So when they were a little bit younger, they would come to tell me about something, and I would assume that they were coming to tell me about it because they wanted me to solve it, right? Because their brother hit them, or because something happened at school. And I assumed they were looking for my advice. I assumed, in other words, that they wanted to have a practical conversation. But pretty quickly what I realized, what all parents realize is, no. When these children come to you, what they actually want is they want to have an emotional conversation. And the thing is that what we've learned from neuroscience is that if you're having different kinds of conversations at the same time, you can't really hear each other. Right? When I would come home from work and I would complain about my day, and my wife would say, oh, why don't you take your boss out to lunch? You guys get to know each other a little bit better. I would get even more upset because I wanted to have an emotional conversation. I wanted to tell her how I felt, and she wanted to have a practical conversation. She wanted to solve the problem. And those are both entirely legitimate forms of communication. But when you're not having the same kind of conversation at the same moment, you can't connect with each other. You can't fully hear each other. So you're exactly right. When it comes to kids, oftentimes, the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of conversation is happening?
So in the book, Super Communicators, Charles writes about these 3 types of conversations. There are practical conversations. That is, how do I do this? Can you help me fix this? I'm hungry. I need food. There's emotional conversations. I'm feeling this. I'm struggling with that. I'm mad. I'm frustrated. I'm sad. I'm excited. And there's social conversations. Social conversations are the kinds of conversations where we're looking at one another and saying, this is how we relate to each other. These are the identities that are important to us.
It's interesting. As he was speaking about these 3 different conversations, my default response was, as a male, you are so into fix-it mode. Solutions.
I feel like I've just been gendered.
You have been.
I think as a parent, I'm going to go one further. I think males do it because that's typically what they do all the time. But if you're in a position of power or authority, if you're in a position where you have know-how, you automatically assume that when somebody is coming to you, they want a problem fixed.
Well, you didn't let me finish.
Yeah.
Because as I was sitting there listening and feeling very vilified because you're the one who's fix-it man all the time when it comes to conversations, it occurred to me that nearly every time the kids come to me with an emotional challenge, there is a desire to fix it for them. And so you're exactly right. When you're in that place of power, number one, we hate to see other people suffering, especially when it's our kids. And so our initial reaction too often is to try and solve it, to try and fix it, without giving our children grace, a space of grace, and acknowledging that they actually have got what they need within them. We're just there to help guide them to find the answers.
There's something that I've been doing since I've read the book, and I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but as we're having a conversation or as I'm talking with the children, as the conversation progresses, I will look at you or one of the children and I'll ask a simple question. Essentially, I'm saying, what type of conversation are we having? And I ask that question by saying something along the lines of, what are you hoping to get out of this? Or how can I help? Or what is it that you want? Why are you telling me this? Have you noticed that I've been saying that?
Yeah, you do it all the time.
I was hoping that you'd say no, because I was doing it so easily and so incidentally, like it's just part of the conversation. But the reason I do it all the time is because when you say, I just want to be understood, or I just want to be held, or I don't know what to do here and I need some guidance, or when you say, I just want to work out where we sit in relation to the issue, I know whether we're having a practical conversation or an identity-based social conversation, or whether we're having an emotional conversation where you just want to be held and hugged and listened to and have my presence.
Later in the interview, he actually talks about whether or not our children want a hug, they want to be helped, or they just want to feel heard.
Right.
And it just, it's beautiful.
Simple strategy when you're having a conversation with your kids or with anybody at all. How can I help here? Or what is it that made you come to me and share this with me? Finding out what the conversation's about helps you to be a far better communicator and make sure that you're not talking past each other. How useful are those tips? How great are those ideas? The take-home message. Let's make sure that we connect with our kids and ask lots of questions and specifically understand what kind of conversation we're having. Great interview, great conversation with Charles Duhigg. We will play the entire thing on Saturday from go to woe so that you can get all of the best snippets. I recommend the book as well. The book is called Super Communicators: How to Unlock the Secret Language of Connection. Compelling storytelling. Amazing insights. I loved it. Charles Duhigg is the author of that book, New York Times bestselling author and Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rowland from Bridge Media. Please leave us a 5-star rating and review if you're enjoying the pod. When you do that, it helps other people to find the podcast, make their families happier. Oh, and you get a little bit of a warm, fuzzy inside because you've helped us to help other people. Everyone wins, and it only takes you 20 or 30 seconds to do it. Wherever you're listening, leave us a 5-star rating and review, please. If you'd like more information and more resources about making your family happier, you'll find it all at happyfamilies.com.au.